What happens when you go in blind to what people are calling the most dark and disturbing movies? Today's source was a random IMDb list of the most dark and disturbing films. I challenged myself to write down the first films I see that I haven't seen, so I can go in blind, knowing nothing. I'm forcing myself to fill in those gaps in my watch history without the opportunity to back out. The reason I chose this random IMDb list is because there was only 3 out of the 29 I hadn't seen, and I hadn't heard anything about these films before. And the rest of the recommendations on this random list do align with me in certain ways, most of them. So, MJ Heger, will I be thanking you or cursing you by the end? So the list started with many I know and love, but what is this? Descent 2007? The only thing I knew was it had a 4.7 I could see from this listing on IMDb, but they also had a personal note instructing me to take a shot after the last scene to try and forget, and they were right. From the jump, I was surprised with Descent because of how low the rating was. The quality wasn't awful, and even more shocking, the lead for this film is Rosario Dawson. Although she's no stranger to disturbing films, her first debut feature was Kids, but it also stars Chad Faust. Yes, Dean from Saved. Great film. Directed by Talia Lugosi, Descent is a drama thriller about Maya, a reserved college student focused on her studies. And she's approached one night by Jared, a strange guy who talks her ear off at a party and then follows it up by leaving roses at her door. I am going to do full spoilers for this film, and you'll see why. It's very important because of the way it ends. So I'm just giving you a second. If you do want to pass on to the next film, that's totally fine. I can't really get into the content without speaking about it. If you're morbidly curious, this is the place to be. So she eventually agrees to go on a date with him, but once they're alone, he sexually assaults her. This scene is long and intense. It is mostly close-up shots of faces, kind of out of focus, but the audio is awful, horrific. Jared talks through the entire scene using violent language and slurs. We then cut to spring. Maya is a different person now, and the film pivots and we begin to see how the trauma has impacted and changed her life. During this portion, there are a few heavy-handed metaphors, which are very interesting because it goes along with the rest of the film and the idea or kind of mixed intent that you can read it both ways. And there is this scene. The scene that I'm talking about is this mannequin, and she works in a clothing store, and we have this weird time lapse as the mannequin is staying still in time, almost frozen. It's a haunting metaphor for how she was frozen, stuck. But as the image lingers, you can read it in a lot of painful ways. Things being done to this mannequin where they're unable to react or fight back. Another metaphor comes later when Maya wakes up in an unfamiliar place and is offered an apple. This is possibly a biblical reference. She is committing a sin of no return. I mean, an apple is very particular in this scene. It doesn't add anything to the dialogue, the messaging, or the story, but I do find it to be in quite poor taste if that was the angle, but I just don't understand why it's emphasized. Hold on, you'll see why. This is a controversial film. So from this point forward, Maya begins drifting into the darker side of life. This is when she is around Adrian, an edgy underground figure who feeds her toxicity. She experiments with drugs, sex, and risk, and this becomes a story of coping and then eventually revenge, because we go into the third act. Because Maya meets Jared again. Back at graduate school, once she has done all of her evolving, and this time she is not who she used to be. And they have a very awkward encounter where she accuses him of cheating on a test, and he says, "It's your word against mine," which is so blatant and uncomfortable, but that is the whole point. The dialogue here is incredibly blunt, and what should have landed as bitter irony comes off frustratingly obvious, almost like the film doesn't trust the viewer to read subtext. But she takes the opportunity to invite Jared back over for a night he will not forget. Here, she gets him to strip, feeding his ego. She ties him up in another room, and before he knows it, he's in a very dangerous situation and the tables have turned. She begins to tell him that she doesn't regret who she's become and she's learned a lot about herself. She says things like, "You made me open my eyes and learn about risk, and I'm different now. She then goes into great detail about how in her dreams she recounts the events of that night and how things could have gone differently. And then out of nowhere, she uses an item to assault him. It is very long, but when she's done with that portion of the scene, she invites Adrian, who was in the next room, to come in and keep things going. Adrian assaults him in one of the longest assault scenes I've ever seen. It feels like that I've ever seen in one of these films. And mirroring the first assault scene, Adrian speaks openly. Very violent, very vulgar. Some slurs are also used. It is insane. It is shocking. It is true disturbing content. It's prolonged. It's brutal. You can see the close-ups of both of their faces during it. They just keep going back and forth to the reverse. You don't see too much physical, but there are some wide shots, and just the reverse shots of their face. And it is worth noting that Descent was released in two different cuts. One was a 105-minute uncut NC-17 version, and the other is a 95-minute that is R-rated. The edited version removes 7 minutes of this scene. That's how long the scene is. You always hear about the scene in Irreversible, and knowing that they can cut 7 minutes from this scene, how long is it? I really don't want to go back and check, don't make me. What makes Descent interesting and controversial is that it doesn't just show trauma. It shows how trauma transforms, and for everything you could say about how uncomfortable the movie is, and it is, it gives Maya a full emotional arc. She's shown as a layered character before and after the assault, which doesn't happen a lot in these kinds of revenge films. But the dialogue in this film often comes across as strange. When Maya first meets Jared, there's a moment where he becomes Dawson Creek coded. The way he's speaking as a college student, very poetic, self-reflective monologues. It doesn't quite match the tone or really what's to come, and perhaps this is a way to hide his true intentions. But then again, the tone is absolutely wild, because later he says this line I will never forget. He talks about how he used to play piano, and she asks him why he doesn't play piano anymore. This is before the assault. And he says, why tickle ivory when you can tickle the pearl? I understand that this film is trying to present the idea that deep down anyone can be evil. But the dialogue adds a very strange layer to the movie overall, including in the assault scenes. For me, Descent on the surface is a story about revenge served cold, but it's also about survival, identity, and how time can mutate pain into something else. I know that the film's intent is to discuss whether traumatic events can fundamentally change people, and duh, of course they can. But as many critics have pointed out, the film leans dangerously into the suggestion that Maya grew from her trauma. She even speaks negatively to who she was before, and I understand that this can be coping, but the way it's wrapped up, it seems like it's suggesting something else, and I understand how this could be controversial or make viewers who relate to her story very uncomfortable. I do think this is why the film has such a low score, because it's such a strange angle and perspective on the subject. But this can all be explained in the director's intent, which they talked about in an interview with The Reeler. She said, I have a passion for films from the 60s and 70s that allow you to explore topics rather than tell you how to feel about them, that contain different genres and tones within themselves, that change within themselves without ever explaining themselves. She went on to say, we want to put questions out about these things, not to tell people what to think. That's the premise for the way that we structured the story. Every step of the way, you see the journey Rosario's character is on. You see her identify with herself and re-identify with herself, trying continuously to grapple with who she thinks she is, who she thought she was, and who she's becoming. Is revenge a way to redefine identity? The end is definitely ambiguous as to all those questions. The answers are up to you. And I think that Rosario Dawson herself has a really interesting take on her character. She said in an interview that the film is called Descent for many reasons, and one is because of how we see her character devolve. That's what she used, devolve. She said that this woman who you're feeling was a victim is now an attacker, and the person you hated before before is now a victim. It's not so easy, and that's what this film is about. I personally think that is very dicey stuff, but that means that this film achieved exactly what I want to get out of watching disturbing cinema. It crosses the line, it has something to say. I mean, depending how it says it is a different story, but it also has a reveal I was not expecting. And the final shot is spellbinding. Now you know why I had to give full spoilers. It was very important to the themes and the intent of the movie. I'm not sure how much I enjoyed this film, but I would give it an 8 out of 10 for disturbing. The scenes are very long, very long. It's controversial, but it isn't for shock's sake. But next we have a French horror that I have never heard of, and it's called Captives. This is also known as Caged in some regions, and it's not a perfect film, but it's well presented and genuinely tense, and it has some interesting symbolism, again, sprinkled through. It's really short runtime. In fact, all of these films that I'm talking about today didn't go for very long. Captives is a gritty, claustrophobic, and surprisingly concise film for a movie about organ trafficking. That said, it's a pretty grueling ride at times. I'm not going to give you as many spoilers for this one, but it is quite straightforward. It starts with a flashback that is important to set up the character. Carol, she is playing hide and seek with her friend Laura, and Laura disappears. When she finds Laura, she is gone, and a dog was the culprit. It is so interesting how this film is about organs, but I would say a lot of the more disturbing elements and unsettling parts are about dogs, so be warned. But now, decades later, we begin the actual story with adult Carol, who is an aid worker in a war-torn region, and she's preparing to head home with 2 colleagues, but after a roadblock forces them to detour, she's suddenly taken captive, and now the film locks us in with them. At first, it's a little bit of a mystery. Where were they taken? What's happening to them? Who has captured them? But then there's this very heavy-handed metaphor, which I kind of like in this regard. I'm gonna pick and choose. I like this one. We watch their car be stripped of parts, and it's really interesting because that's exactly what's going to happen to them, or what these people intend to do to them. And then the dogs start barking in the distance, and Carol returns to her state of fear about the dogs. And this is throughout the film. There is constant barking and more scenes with dogs, and it really does become her having to overcome this childhood fear, which it's very strange when there's, the human organ thing happening. But it's kind of a poetic twist because she does kind of become the dog in a cage. At first, the prisoners are fed and they're examined by a man dressed as a doctor, but slowly the horror builds as they realize their fate. It's very obvious very quickly. They have been caught and they're in a black market organ trafficking ring. And here is another irony. They are health workers, medical aid, who have been captured by people who are using the medical system or their medical knowledge for pure evil. While the film feels very direct with its intent, we'll get to this in a second, it holds a consistent tone of dread throughout. And interesting enough, the psychological damage on the captives waiting for their fate is just as haunting for the viewer as the physical. I'm gonna be honest, for a film about harvesting one's body, there isn't a lot of gore, not the level that I expected. But here's where the intent is kind of confusing, because although the film claims to be based on true events, I found out afterwards doing a little research, and the film is actually surrounded with a bit of controversy because it opens with a message about real-life organ trafficking in Kosovo. But many argue that the film actually reverses history, because after the war shown in the film, serious allegations were made against certain groups involved in violence and organized crime in Kosovo, including organ trafficking. A number of people were linked to those groups and went on to hold political power. While some were named in reports, no one has been convicted of the trafficking yet. And in real life, in these cases, Serb prisoners were harvested, so it's the complete opposite of what is presented in this film. Critics from the region later accused the film of being a frightening attempt to rewrite history and mocking real victims. I know it's really hard to follow up on that controversy, but I also cannot stress enough how hard this film goes on its animal content. I think it does just as much to the animals as it does to the victims. Is Captives a masterpiece? No, but it does something that a lot of horror movies struggle with. It keeps things tight, visually striking, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It avoids leaning too hard into shock value, although it's not really pulling any punches either. It lets its setting and symbolism speak for itself along with a straightforward storyline, although although the truth may be absent here. I would say this one is a 5 out of 10 for disturbing, which is absolutely wild to say about a movie with this theme. I never thought I would say that. But I haven't been tested truly yet because 99 Women was the last movie I hadn't seen on this list. And this is so random why this movie was put on this list. It does not match up with any of the other films. I can't get through one of these disturbing blind watch videos without seeing some hardcore sex. Within the first 10 minutes, I felt like I had accidentally tripped into a Euro porn dungeon disguised as a prison movie. There's a sadistic warden, an island prison, a naked woman being marched across a courtyard. But my confusion was more about the fact that they're all full glam. Full face of makeup, fresh blowouts. I should have known what was to come because there's no realism here. This is full exploitation. Directed by Jess Franco, 99 Women is often cited as one of the earliest successful women in prison films. But tell that to the IMDb score because instead of gritty realism or social commentary, we're handed a glossy, surreal soap opera of sex, suffering, and honestly, a really cute kind of backing track. It's very groovy, very jazz. Every time one of these scenes takes place, we just snap right back into it. It becomes this running kind of theme or joke for the viewer. The movie follows Marie, lucky inmate number 99, as she's thrown into a prison on an island that is more like a twisted adult activity resort, ruled by a sadistic warden and her equally unhinged male counterpart. Honestly, I'm underselling it. I really am, because this time it is not suggestive. It is hardcore, full frontal. So many bouncy balls in caves, in broad daylight, in prison cells, everywhere, anywhere. But here is the thing. Although some consensual, most not. It feels both exploitative and confused about what it wants to be. Is it an erotic fantasy or is it a serious commentary on prison abuse and animalistic desire? Either way, everyone's hair is styled and their makeup is flawless. Even after a fight scene, no one is breaking a nail here. Honestly, it's full manicure. These girls have been out here for a long time. There is no way they look like this. But the governor at one point tells the warden that he thinks she's missed her call as a madam in a brothel. So the film does know what it's doing. And during the chaos, there are some moments that kind of work. I guess I wanted to like. I should say, I can see why people would like the stylization because you know in prison shows and movies where they give a little bit of a background flashback to how someone got into that situation. Think Chicago, and you want to say it, Orange is the New Black. You know, the backstories of the women. And these are told through fantasy-laced, dreamlike flashbacks. I can't show you any because they're all X-rated. But you know, he had it coming. Feels it's almost there. And I like that. We get some glimmers of revenge stories and betrayal, and they're quite moody and stylized. But it's also really hard to get a complete read on this film because there are so many versions or cuts. Some versions cutting up to 26 minutes, other versions added scenes, hardcore scenes with actors that weren't in the film, just spliced in there. And a UK version even cut a scene of animal cruelty before even touching any of the nude stuff. It's one of those films that exists in about 10 forms and none of them are cohesive at all because the film feels like an erotic dream. Nothing is realistic and it's not intending to be, which makes it easier to splice and cut up because none of it's really making any sense anyway. But the film still works in the way it was intended or the way it wants you to feel. And while the film starts with a bang, I mean, the warden has this on their desk. The last scene is very brutal, perhaps the most brutal in terms of adult content. But putting this all together, this film about a woman going to this prison, it does not go the way I thought it would. It becomes a weird story about desire and possible escape and the jungle. There's surprisingly a lot of jungle scenes in this movie. So what is it really about? Well, superficially, it is about sex and suffering. But for me, It's just exploitation for the sake of it, which is wild because even though it's framed as an erotica, a lot of these scenes, as I've stated, are non-consensual or manipulative. It's an exploitation film dressed up with some artsy lighting and some smooth music. It is weirdly polished, sometimes even beautiful, but it never lets you forget what it is. It's a relic of a certain kind of cinema, a certain time, one that toes a line between curiosity and the taboo, but mostly it falls flat on both sides. But if you're into historical exploitation and you're curious about the roots of the genre, or just want to see a lot of naked people attempt to escape a prison with amazing eyeliner, check it out. These lists definitely take me strange places. I'd probably give this one a 6 on the disturbing scale. So not that disturbing today. I've definitely rated films more disturbing than these ones, but I want to know how many of you have seen these films. The whole point is to bring us both films that we haven't seen to explore together. If you've come on this journey with me so far, thank you so much. I suffer for you. It's all for you, Damien. And if you have made it this far, let's have a little secret joke in the comments and let's talk about the lemons. Do what you want to do with that. Get mad at me in the comments. I'm giving you permission. Tell me off for misrepresenting the lemons, for not understanding the lemon metaphor. You guys know what to do. Just an emoji if you're shy. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being here. A huge thank you to my patrons. I don't know if this video will get restricted. I'm trying really hard to push the language barrier, and I can only do so very slowly. So I do appreciate all of you guys. You guys are very smart and you totally understand what I'm saying. I'm glad you guys are enjoying this series. If you're looking for a more chatty, kind of chill video, I do have a list of everything I watched last month right here to check out. And if you're into horror, which is my kind of thing, horror, thriller, and disturbing movies, I also have a video on I Know What You Did Last Summer. I went and saw the remake, and I'm a huge fan of the original. So come with me, spoiler free, and I'll tell you what I thought, so you know whether it's worth your time. I'll talk to you all very soon. Stay safe and stay spooky. Bye, friends.